The New York Times had a lengthy conversation with Jerry Seinfeld about what books he is reading. Jerry, what's the last great book you read? Jerry said, the Marx Brothers book is a great book. Before that, I read another book about comedy. I think I'm doing this being the book Jerry put out, because it gives me that feeling I'm missing of being around. When you're in comedy, you're like a tropical fish in an aquarium, or at least I am. That's my life. If he said to a tropical fish, would you like to go anyplace else? He's going to go, you know what? I think I'd just like to stay here. I like the aquarium. So I'm a tropical fish in an aquarium. And since I can't go on stage and hang around other comedians, I read about them. So there's this other book I just found on my bookshelf. I bought it and I never read it. It's called Seriously Funny by Gerald Nashman. This is another incredibly well-researched history of comedians from the 50s and 60s. They really invented the form of stand-up comedy that I do. So that's another fantastic book. It goes comedian by comedian. It's just fun to sit there with Mort Saul and Woody Allen and Dick Gregory and these guys when they were starting out. Jerry said his favorite memoir is Steve Martin's Born Standing Up. I think that's the best book about being a comedian, written by a comedian, ever done. As for his influences, there was a book in the early 70s called The Last Laugh by Phil Berger. That was the first book I ever found. I think it's the first book anybody ever did about the world of stand-up comics. Does Jerry read fiction? I used to read more. I really loved John Updike and John Irving. Updike to me was insane. I loved microscopic acuity, and I thought he was untouchable in that, the fineness and the smallness of things that he would describe so well. What's Jerry's favorite book no one's heard of? Definitely The Last Laugh. I don't think anybody has heard of these other comedy books either. What book would Jerry most like to see turned into a TV show or a movie that hasn't already been adapted? Jerry said, the Marx Brothers book, obviously, I would love, but I don't know if people would be interested, and you could never do it. You can never recreate this, guys. Remember when they did the Three Stooges movie? My manager, George Shapiro, said, trying to get somebody to act like a comedian is like trying to get them to act like a baseball player. It's almost impossible. There's so many tiny, polished movements. They have the best actor struggle to replicate. I mean, Dustin Hoffman's a wonderful actor. I love him, but he can't do stand-up because actors are acting. Comedians are talking to a group of people as if there is an individual. They're locked in on those people. They're not really thinking about performing. The focus is who they're talking to. There's a certain obsessed psychotic energy that all the stand-ups have. It's very hard to manufacture. They're nuts. They're just nuts. What was the last book that made Jerry laugh? I don't really laugh reading books. It's pretty hard to laugh when you're reading. The written word is tough. I mean, the Updike stuff is funny to me, describing the circles of water under someone's toes when they get out of the pool. That makes me laugh more than anything, that he would zero in on that. Jerry, are there subjects you wish more authors would write about? Nah, I think that everything's well covered. That's such a Jerry answer, isn't it? Jerry, which genres do you enjoy reading? Fiction is such a high bar. You have to be such an insane writer to write fiction. If you're writing about something that really happened, you can just be okay and it's still very interesting. So historical writing is what I'm usually drawn to. Jerry, do you have a favorite New York book? I guess Bonfire of the Vanities. Do you count any books as comfort reads or guilty pleasures? I don't feel guilt to begin with. I guess a little bit of guilty pleasure for me was a book called Thinking Small about the beginning of the Volkswagen Beetle by Andrea Hyatt. Boy, Jerry knows his authors. She did a great job telling the story of New York advertising, the Nazis and Ferdinand Porsche colliding to create this amazing car, which people take for granted because it's so common. But it was such an insanely brilliant invention as a car. I read car magazines. I guess that would be my guilty pleasure. And sometimes old Superman comics. See, Jerry, the written word can be funny. You just cracked me up. That's such a Jerry answer. Jerry, what's the most interesting thing you learned from a book recently? The first Marx Brothers was The Coconuts, which was originally a play that they did. And Talkies had just happened, and a couple of years later, Hollywood was looking for anybody that could talk on film, and obviously grabbed the Marx Brothers, and they made this movie. Nobody really knew how to make a movie. They just kind of shot the play on stage, and the brothers hated it. They hated it so much, they wanted to buy it back so it wouldn't be released. That was a giant monster hit, and it made a fortune. That was so much fun to read, stuff like that. People do things, and they hate them, and the public loves them, and they have to change their thinking on it. Here comes another hilarious Jerry kind of answer. How do you organize your books? I use a bookshelf. If you stack them up as opposed to putting them on end, you're not going to read them. Any book that it's on its side, you're never going to read it. If it's up, you can just put your fingers on the top and slide it out. You might read that one. So, Jerry, you're not a big Dewey Decimal guy? No. Dewey Decimal, how old are you? This is a lot of fun and taking longer than I thought. Let's take the break and come back and do more about Jerry's books. I'm cribbing from the New York Times here. They spoke to Jerry Seinfeld about his book collection. Jerry Seinfeld, what book might people be surprised to find on your shelves? Sadly, nothing. It's comedians, cars. I even have books about coffee. So yeah, I have to confess that I'm so exhausted from writing that I don't even want to dive into a book most days. I'm so tired of staring at pages. Jerry, were you a big reader as a child? No. In my 20s and 30s is the most reading I ever did. That's when the business got much more demanding and I was spending hours a day writing. That's when I stopped reading a lot. I couldn't spend half my day writing and the other half reading. I was like, I gotta go nuts here. Jerry, which 3 writers, dead or alive, would you invite to a literary dinner party? Well, Updike I mentioned. I think David Halberstam would be a great dinner guest, and I'm into the Marx Brothers thing now, so I'd like to sit with this guy Bader for dinner. And Lincoln, I consider him to be a great writer. The Bader mentioned there is Robert Bader. I actually know Robert. We used to work together on Bing Crosby Christmas Radio. Robert's a cool guy. I have his number, Jerry, if you want it. Jerry, do you ever put a book down without finishing it? Oh, yeah. It's like stand-up. If it doesn't grab you right away and hold on to you, it's too bad. Sorry. Jerry, what's the best book you ever received as a gift? Born Standing Up. Someone gave me. I thought the book was a great accomplishment in that little area of interest I have. Jerry, has a book ever brought you closer to another person or come between you? I've been forcing a lot of comedians to read this seriously funny book because comedians always need to be lifted up. They tend to get depressed and discouraged. It's a very discouraging profession. So when you read this book and you see the struggle of other comedians, these iconic names, and you had no idea what a difficult time they had and how they actually didn't even do that well, most of them, you think of them as these great legends and you find out they only had 5 or 6 good years and they kind of hit the skids. That's very encouraging. So I force a lot of comedians to get into that book. Success is not encouraging. Failure is. Jerry, what are you going to read next? I'm out of stuff. But along the same lines as John Updike, I might give Nicholson Baker a shot. That was wildly entertaining. A filler episode of my podcast? Oh, yeah. If you're hearing this, it means I need a day off. But that was fun. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, follow on Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. If you like what I do here, buymeacoffee.com/dailycomedynews. I will catch you tomorrow.